Welcome back, Parshas Vaeiro. So many incredible lessons to be learned this week. And there are many out there that will spend time going through beautiful, beautiful ideas that we see from the Ashgacha Pratis that we see in this week's Parsha, the Aschala of Yetzias Mitzrayim, in the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu guided Moshe and showed him how everything happens as it is intended by Hashem himself. Nothing happens on its own. Nothing happens on its own time, on its own schedule. Rather, everything is detailed for a reason, as we see in the Agada. Every single makkah with its timing, who it affected, and so forth. Beautiful insights in the Medrash of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends Moshe to intercept Paroi, so Paroi should not have a chance to daven to Hashem, because if indeed he had the chance, that would cause a big issue with Klal Yisrael's Yeshua. How incredible that lesson is. And so forth, many incredibly powerful and indeed necessary lessons that we must take from this week's Parsha. However, I would like to focus on two very delicate but very important points in this week's Parsha. Beginning of the Makkos, we see that Moshe Rabbeinu cannot be the one to go and hit the water, whether it's for Dam, Tzefardea, or Kinnim. Why? Because at some level the water had a connection with his survival. Even though the Torah tells us that his mother puts him in a basket as a newborn, a basket that is capable of floating. In other words, it was capable of surviving the power of the water. Even though the Torah tells us that it was Basya Bas Paroi who pulls him from the water with incredible nisim, still the water had somewhat of a connection to his survival, and for that Moshe Rabbeinu needs to show Akaras HaToiv. And even though these makkos that he is now inflicting on Paroi is in essence a part and a tool to the Yeshua of Klal Yisrael, in other words, something important for the survival of the entire world, still he should not be the one to hit the water. An incredible, delicate line of Akaras HaToiv that the Torah tells us that Moshe should show to the water for being a part of his personal Yeshua. As we continue into the Parsha, we see Elazar ben Aharon took Mibnois Putiel, and we look in Chazal and we see the incredible level of an unimaginable sensitivity that the Torah showed that Klal Yisrael needs to understand of how one perceives another person's feelings and emotions. Even though indeed Yisroi was Putiel, at some point he was a priest. He was the high priest worshipping an idol and preparing what needs to be prepared for that idol. Still, there was an incredible level and sensitivity that Chazal tell us not to chas v'shalom in his face, call him by this name, not to remind him of this past. Reb Yankele tells us an unbelievable story. Reb Yisrael Salanta used to say there was a story back at home in Europe where there was a fellow who was a shoemaker. And as luck would have it, he was extremely successful to a point where he became very wealthy. As he became very wealthy, he was marrying off one of his children. He decided to make a grand wedding, just as the other rich people in town would make. At the wedding, one of the other rich people, born rich, continued to be rich, was bothered by the fact that this shoemaker thinks that he fits into their circle. So as they were going down to the chuppah, he goes over to the shoemaker. He takes off his shoe and he asks him, what would it take to fix such a shoe? And this fellow was extremely insulted. And Reb Yisrael Salanta pointed out that, of course, in Shemayim, the Rabbonim of that generation who were not able to give the Mussar and teach the people not to even think of committing an action like that, these Rabbonim are being pulled before the Beis Din Shel Maila. That's what Reb Yisrael Salanta said. Reb Yankele tells us, however, it's incredibly interesting. Why is it that a person in such a position should see this and be hurt? Shouldn't a person say, wow, look where I came from. I came from being a shoemaker, and now I'm incredibly wealthy. I'm doing extremely well that I could make this incredibly beautiful wedding. In other words, we see that there is a major difference between what one says to oneself and between what we say to one another. The Heilige Tana Reb Akiva spent 40 years hating Talmidei Chachamim with the incredible lashonos that we see in Chazal, the passion that he had against Talmidei Chachamim. And he went on to make a tefillah, remembering the fact that Hashem removed him from being part of the people who are far away from Torah to now being part of the Yoshvei Beis HaMedrash. Adarabah, he wanted to remember where he came from. On the other hand, we see the Torah prevents us from reminding Ger Tzedek where he comes from. Even though in essence, as the Chasam Sofer mentions, this should be an incredibly happy moment for a Ger Tzedek, when he remembers that he was Zoiche to come from being a Goy to becoming a Ger Tzedek. Yet the Torah prohibits us from reminding a Ger Tzedek where he comes from. In other words, coming back to our original point, the incredible sensitivity that the Torah is teaching us in this week's Parsha, telling us that even though there might be some things that we for ourselves would actually appreciate, we would enjoy thinking, look where I came from and look where I am now. And especially at times when we think that we could say something to another person and say, you know what, it will help him grow. It will remind him how far he came. The Torah tells us, no. Our obligations as human beings in this world is to attend to the sensitivity of others, to make sure that we are as and even more sensitive to other people's past, even more so than we would be to our own. Of course, a person to his or own past, of course, it's quite easy to say and to see, look how far I've come. But when it comes to the people around us, when it comes to the people we talk to, or when it comes to people who are in the public sphere, and we sometimes enjoy talking about them in different ways, remember the sensitivity that the Torah commands from us, that the Torah demands from Moshe Rabbeinu as he's fulfilling his life's mission of bringing a Geula for Klal Yisrael. Still, he should not be doing it by his own hand, because the water had somewhat shaykhs to his survival. Be sensitive to that tiny little bit connection that is there. Be sensitive, even though of course the water is now part of the Nisim, of the revelation of Hashem in this world. Still, the Torah demands that sensitivity. How important it is today to remember to focus in with all the incredible, chaotic obstacles, challenges, and different ideas that stand in front of us today, trying to divert our attention from what's really in front of us. It is so important for us to remember this again and again and again, to be sensitive to what we hear, to what we see, and especially to what we say. Thank you for joining me today. Have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos.